everybody. Well, welcome to our October 2023 Bible and Beyond Textual Study and Discussion. I'm your host, Shirley Paulson, and we have a special treat tonight with two guests, Natalie Perkins and Dr. Hal Taussig. And I expect they're both familiar to at least some of you who've been with us for quite some time. But just to be sure, let me say that Hal is retired New Testament professor and pastor. He's provided quite a few of our Bible and Beyond textual studies for these Monday evening Bible and Beyond discussions, along with numerous blog posts on our website, Early Christian Text. And they're all in our archives and cover a wide range of topics. Check them out if you haven't heard them before. And then Natalie's been with us before too. She was here in, I think it was 2020, when we discussed her musical rendition of the Odes of Solomon. Check out her podcast and Bible and Beyond discussion with her too. Natalie is one of these incredible modern Renaissance women. She's a preacher, a musician, an actor, a composer, a speaker, a student of ancient Christian texts, and an incredible friend to the world. I'm excited that you're both here with us tonight. Very happy to have you. So our topic tonight is finding wisdom for today from an extracanonical smorgasbord. Have you ever had one before? That's what we're doing tonight. In this study, we'll be discussing some of the most intriguing texts from the modern discoveries of ancient 2nd century texts. Natalie and Hal have co-authored a book, this book here, titled In Trembling Boldness, Wisdom Today from Ancient Jesus People. The main point is that they found deeply relevant ideas from these extra-canonical texts that inspire and encourage people from all walks of life today. And before we get going, let me extend special thanks to our Patreon supporters. I'm excited to say that several of you have been supporters for over a year or even two. And now I finally have some fun Bible and Beyond gifts that I'll be sending to you in gratitude. New Patreon supporters are at any level are also really appreciated. So go to patreon.com/Bible and Beyond, and thank you so much. All right, well, we're in for a treat tonight, and we'll get going with some questions that I have for Hal and Natalie. And by the way, be preparing for questions, because after half an hour of my chatting with them, we're going to give all of you a chance to ask them questions also. So you can be prepared for your questions also. But I'm going to get started. One of the reasons I was so drawn to your book, In Trembling Boldness, is that you found such wonderful relevance to some of these ancient, lesser-known texts that we've been looking at for a while. And I think it would be helpful for us to dig into some of these texts, and then you can guide us to some of your own insights about their wisdom for today. So, Natalie, let me start with you. I'd like to ask you about the Acts of Paul and Thecla. It's been one of our favorite texts here at Bible and Beyond. And I wonder if you might just give us a quick review of the story that led up to Thecla's baptizing of herself. You want to start there?
Okay, yes. There's a lot that happens in this story, so I'll try to keep it brief.
Okay, great.
So Thecla's a young girl, let's say 14, living at home, engaged, because that's what she did at 14 then, because that was what society was, and you didn't really have a choice. And Paul comes traveling through with a couple of companions, and he stays with Onesiphorus. This text is the only text that I know of that has a physical description of Paul, which is kind of humorous. So he's visiting with Onesiphorus and talking about giving his version of the Beatitudes. And Thecla hears him through the window and is transfixed and does not move from this window. The mother tries to get her to move, no dice. Her mom then calls her fiance. He tries to get her to move, no dice. So they mourn like she's dead at that point. Paul's companions run into her fiance Thamyris in the street and says something along the lines of like, we can help you get rid of this guy, Paul. Just go, talk to the governor and tell him, that he's like changing all the young people to not believe in traditional family values, not do what the law says, sort of energy. And so he does just that. And Thecla is brought up on some charges and sentenced to die by fire, is saved by nature, and goes to meet Paul. I'm skipping a whole lot of stuff. Goes to meet Paul, who's been kicked out of the city, and finds him in a cave, and they rejoice and eat, and then go to Antioch. And in Antioch, she runs into another person who has decided that he wants her for his very own, Alexander, and she embarrasses him profusely on the streets. And as a result, she is brought up again before a new governor, and he sentences her to death by wild animal. She stays with Tryphena in the interim before she's brought up to the animals, and Tryphena kind of, I don't know, nurtures her like her own daughter. She's then taken to the animals, and it's there in the whole pit of animalness. There's this great pit of water with like these man-eating seals in it, or people-eating seals rather, and it's there that she baptizes herself. She says, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I baptize myself on the last day," and throws herself into this pit full of water and people eating animals, and they all float to the surface dead. And there's this cloud of smoke and fire that surrounds her, so no one can see her naked. And yeah, that's how we get to that point, roughly.
That's a wild tale, I have to say. Okay, so then, Hal, could you tell us a little bit how in the world Thecla could baptize herself? I mean, I've never heard of such a thing other than with Thecla. How does it work, and what does it mean in antiquity for a woman to baptize herself? And what did baptism mean to Jesus followers?
Thanks a lot, and thank you all for being with us tonight. So the thing about this text that I think is particularly strong is that it makes us impose on the text something that couldn't have happened. And that was in several different ways. That is, it assumes that there is a something in the first or second century that is a rite of passage, and that it would be called baptism. The problem here is multiple, and let me just say, by and large, that the Greek word for that we translate baptism is basically wrong. That is, it assumes that there is a kind of ritual in the first or second century that there really is almost no way of proving that it even exists. But what is true is what is deep within a whole bunch of different kinds of ritual making people in the Mediterranean. And the word what the we now in the later Christianity call baptism simply means a regular dunking or a regular basically making one either clean or fairly excited because one gets to just simply jump in the water. And so I would want to say then on the a part of Thecla in this study, as far as most of us that have studied ancient baptism, it doesn't exist until the 3rd or 4th century in anything that's like what we do, or we do, not even that, but what we have, especially for me, I'm especially available for thinking about how the people of Israel and all people of Israel regularly have baths that are partly a celebration simply of having a good time and of relaxing. In some cases, and these are all mostly either in rivers or pools inside or outside a small a small part outside a small a small house. You have a little pond. And this is a fairly regular thing. Occasionally, you'll find in these bathings, you'll find that there are prayers said, but very often not at all.
Yeah.
That's a later Christian thing.
It's really interesting to think about, Hal. I wonder if we also ought to go and think about these other threats on her life too. And maybe Natalie, you can talk a little bit about if you have any reflections on how or why she avoided those threats. I mean, being in the fire and with the animals.
I think it's really interesting in this text that nature saves Thecla so many times. God through nature, so divine nature, if you will. And for me, it's just interesting to consider that alongside. Sorry, I got a new puppy recently, and he is living his best life right now in this hour that we're together, apparently. It's interesting to me to consider the ways in which nature, or we interact with nature today, and we were all at Wild Goose recently with a colleague of ours, Shaban, who talked about the call that we have to take care of the earth, right, in the Bible. And that in the Native American and indigenous peoples world, they don't consider it that way. They kind of flip it, right? It's not us taking care of Mother Nature, but Mother Nature taking care of us. And that we now can see what happens, right, when Mother Nature stops taking care of us. We're living that now. And so I always think of this story kind of in that sense that, like, Mother Nature in a really interesting way was really showing up for someone who needed her, right, in the way that Mother Nature has always shown up for us, and we just haven't ever really paid attention to it. We've taken it for granted. Is a better way to say that,
Yeah, I love the way you do through the whole book is that you show us how these ideas that they were working with or knew then were so relevant for us for today. So we'll hang on to that kind of theme throughout here. But Hal, let me go back to you and ask about maybe Paul's view of Thecla. Was it natural for him to teach a woman? And then why didn't he baptize her when she asked for it? What do you think about that?
Sure. And again, here we'll need to take on new lenses by and large.
Okay.
Because, and I want to say, first of all, in the Acts of Paul and in other aspects relative to what one would call later baptism. What we have here, I think Natalie is really on target. The way of taking a bath is a deeply exciting and joyful event, especially for the people of Israel, at least from biblical standpoints. And whenever one thinks about eventually Christianity, one has to think through mostly the fact that the people of Israel are every day or two or three are just jumping in these small pieces of water outside their house and hanging around singing and talking.
Okay.
And so what is going on there is really, I think, what Natalie points out very clearly, and that is this is a deep holiness that has nothing to do with doing something except throwing oneself into nature.
Okay, and so Paul was didn't think it was all that important. Is that what you're getting at with Paul then? Why he didn't baptize her?
Thank you. I missed to a certain extent your question. Let me go right at that. So secondly, I want to say that there's no indication within Scripture that there's very much anybody dunking anybody else. It's everybody doing this together. And so, in fact, Paul in Paul's writings often really says explicitly that he doesn't baptize.
Okay.
But that's not because of that he's not participating in this. He's taking the clearness that people do this together, and it's like going into God.
Well, that's really helpful to get a whole new view of what the baptism meant that's so different from our lives today, and to understand what they were doing then. But then since you keep bringing this back to a modern world, then maybe, Natalie, what are your thoughts about what that means between Paul and Thecla today?
I kind of love that, honestly, the idea. I've always read that, Hal, so thank you for sharing it, about Paul not baptizing Thecla in a different way. And I think that the whole, like, I don't really do this as like a communal thing, is what I'm hearing you say. Really resonates with how I think it should be done. It's a community affair, right? How do we do this together? Ouch, buddy. Sorry. So I really love that interpretation of what's happening in this story. I'm weighing now in my body, like, do I love it more than Thecla saying, okay, but this is still a thing that has to happen and is important. And in this moment when my life is like on the line, it's important enough for me to just do it. And I think about that in the lens of I'm a digital minister here at the church where I serve. So in the lens of people who cannot get to church, like, what recourse then do they have for baptism? And to me, this is a way in which they are also able to participate in the life of the church and in their own spiritual life by carrying out this ritual, in this way. And I'm very interested in the creative ways in which clergy can participate if we actually can't physically be there with a person.
So very interesting. Wow. Stretching our minds in all kinds of ways about how to reconceive this ritual versus non-ritual, and community versus alone, and who has the authority, all kinds of questions you're raising for us. That's really helpful. So Hal, we've got so many things we could be talking about there. Those of you who check out the resources on the website know that there are at least 8 or more texts you could have been studying, but Hal has spent a good chunk of his life thinking about the Thunder Perfect Mind, and I'd love to turn to you, Hal, about that. I'm wondering if you could give us some ideas on how you understand this main character, who seems to be mostly she. And one of the verses you quote from your book is where the Thunder character says, "I am she who is honored and she who is mocked. I am the whore and the holy woman." Can you talk to us a little bit about how a single character can also have these opposite characteristics?
Thanks so much. I think that is the first thing to notice about Thecla, who is a really big character in this book. But the first thing that one needs to understand is that she understands herself as divine.
So we're moving on to Thunder, right? You said Thecla. I want to make sure we've moved on to Thunder.
Excuse me, Thunder. Yes.
Okay, got it. Okay, good.
Thecla, Thunder is basically a divine character, but in as much as she is that, she is also not a all-powerful divine character. So this is another kind of divinity that is more mutual, and another kind of divinity that does not point towards one male God, which is in charge of everything else. And here, it's really important to notice that she does claim divinity, but not an all-powerful divinity. And she also very often is attacked by all kinds of other people, mostly from the power of the empire. And there she always stands up against it. Sometimes they throw her down, but she never loses. She also often never wins. So this is a kind of character and a kind of divinity that is multiple, and is I think a really important way of rethinking who God is. God is multiple. God is a kind of strong presence in the middle of being human as well.
Okay, so I hear you're challenging monotheism. Am I right?
Well, you want to go there?
If you could do it in one sentence, of course.
I mean, I'm only interested in doing that if one keeps the real power and interest and love and excitement of Thunder Perfect Mind as a mostly divine divinity.
Okay.
So in other words, it seems to me generally within the New Testament and other books like that, that's also many people find divinities as multiple.
Okay.
The way that you have Christianities later with the one powerful God, for me, is not the best way of thinking through the multiple power and love and strength and smartness of divinity itself.
Great. Well, thank you. Yeah, I know you could go much farther into that whole subject, but that's very helpful, Hal. Thank you. So, Natalie, you got to help us understand how in the world does Thunder, who could say, I'm the wife and the virgin, and I'm the mother and the daughter, and I'm the limbs of my mother, and I am he, the mother. I mean, how does that relate to the world today, really?
One of the important things that we learned from Thunder is about like how we hold binaries or ideas that we might consider dichotomous. And Thunder kind of rejects that and makes us think of them together, right? Putting these two ideas parallel then makes us consider the wholeness of people.
Okay.
In a way that we really are not interested in doing. So I think that's one of the important reasons to familiarize yourself with this text. I am he, the mother, just to be specific. We have so many laws around this country that are now banning people from being who they are. And there could be a trans reading of I am he, the mother, that can empower someone who hasn't ever found themselves, right, in these texts. Not because they're not there, but because we have decided not to translate them in, right? We will change whatever we need to change to make sure we're comfortable with how we read these texts. And as I'm sure you all know, there were 20,000 recent readjustments that happened in the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible as a result of a retranslation of that text and what we've learned about those texts. And that's going to continue to happen. And I'm just curious when we'll release the pronouns as part of that, and people will really be able to see themselves in these texts. But this text, I think, was translated differently a few times before Hal and his team got a hold of it. And we're like, no, I think that those pronouns are intentional. And now people can start to see, oh, I was in the 1st and 2nd century. I'm there too. My ancestors are here as well.
So you're saying it really does say, I am he, the mother, and you're saying that's not a typo.
It's not a typo. No.
Yeah. Wow. It's very interesting. Okay. So
even though like the little autocorrect on your computer may do it, you have to go back and change it. It's not a typo.
It's not a typo. Okay, so and how it looks like this same divine character is kind of vulnerable. And I mean, for example, the passage that says, "Do not be arrogant to me when I'm thrown to the ground. Do not stare at me when I'm thrown out among the condemned. Do not laugh at me in the lowest places." So how is it possible to have a deity we want to lean on who could also seem as vulnerable as the rest of us?
By claiming the multipleness of divinity in general.
Okay.
In other words, it's true that one wants to say, oh, what do we do without the real God? And what I'm saying is that I think in the first 3 centuries in general, the Jesus people points towards multiplicity of divinity. That is the fact that you and I can claim the partial divinity, just like the people that Paul claimed to be. You all that are young people, you should claim life together, and you should claim God as a part of you in being a multiple togetherness of divinity. So in other words, in so many parts of the New Testament and the beyond New Testament characters, you find a multiplicity of divine presence.
Wow. All right. So we are at the half-hour point here. And my goodness, we have so much more we can talk about, but I do want to let everyone else have a chance to ask you these questions. There's so many things to think about. So just for those of you who looked at the text that we had available to you, we can draw on Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Truth, the Thought of Nerea, Odes of Solomon, because Natalie and Hal talked about all those in their book and more. But let's see. I think one way to sort of guide your questions would be to ask of Hal and Natalie about how these things fit into the modern world, because this is where their book really excels. And I'd love to get into that more, or maybe you can just answer those questions when they come along. But let's open it up to the rest of you by raising your hand. And if I'm missing somebody, I'm sure Peggy will be there to help me find people. But our goal right now is to just ask questions and see what you're thinking about.
Can I just answer the question that Grace posed in the chat while we're getting hands?
Sure, let's please do that. Yeah.
So Grace, the title of the text is Thunder Perfect Mind. And that's just tacked on like any of the other texts that we have. We aren't quite sure where these titles come from. The deity in that text does not name herself. But when we're talking about the text, it's easier for us just to use the word thunder because that's the one that the first word on the page when you're looking at the text. So thunder, that name just came from who knows where, like all the rest of them, but the deity in the text is who we're referring to. I'm not sure if that's what you were trying to get at. Let us know if there's a little more that you'd like to hear.
Thank you, Natalie. That's very helpful. All right, Joy has her hand up.
Hi. I love this discussion because it does really help me, because I think reading Thunder Perfect Mind is very confusing to me. And I finally think I got it from what Hal was saying about, to me, it's saying God is a multifaceted being. It's like a prism, and it comes to you the way you need to see it. And that doesn't make God multiple gods. It's just, it has different pictures and different natures. And that's what's cool, because as humans, we want to categorize people as they're a this and they're a that, and if they are a this, then they should act this way. And what it's saying is, we got to look at humans. We as humans now need to look at each other in multifaceted ways and see them how they fit in their circumstance or in my circumstance, and be more accepting. And so I really got a good sense of this from your discussion. Thank you.
I would love to ask the two of you also to talk a little bit about the Gospel of Truth, because you have that in your book, and we haven't ever really talked about that in great detail in these discussions. Do you want to talk a little bit about, either one of you, talk about why the Gospel of Truth is so relevant for us today?
There's so many things about the divinity of truth as a character. I think the most beautiful thing about the character of truth in a pretty large document from the early Jesus people, the most beautiful thing about it, and it reoccurs across the text, is truth smells really good. I mean, really, it's about the most wonderful thing. Truth is actually at some points simply smelling beautiful itself. That's more or less all it is. Sometimes it is the beautifulness of vegetables, or the beautifulness of all kinds of other beings that are above all else beautifully smelling. And so this divinity simply captures humans all over the place and simply makes them into beautiful smells. And for them to know that they and God are smelling beautiful together. So different than basically making divinities into good people or the right people or the structuredly good people. This is a much, much deeper kind of belonging.
Belonging, interesting. So, Natalie, maybe can you, thank you so much for Hal. That's a whole new subject we haven't really talked about very much. That's very helpful. And Natalie, I'm wondering if you can help us understand how that relates to like an everyday life experience, like how you do that in your book so beautifully and often, talking about how these texts really can speak to someone's life today. Do you have any examples of how the gospel of truth might be useful for us today?
I do think the gospel of truth spends a lot of time just being with beauty and seeing beauty and experiencing beauty in all of the ways that you might imagine it. I think, like Hal said, smell is not one of the ones I feel like we pay a whole lot of attention to when we're talking about beauty. But this text talks about the fragrance of the Father, like the children have this like fragrance of the Father, which I think is so cool. Like I just love that idea of, what smells or what do you think of when you think of home? What comes to mind? And where does that permeate in your life still? Like, where do you carry it? I remember last winter, I went to like the end of winter, I was putting away my winter coat. I think I took out my gloves from my pocket and I smelled them and they smelled like my great aunt. Like they smelled like my great aunt. Like literally. And I don't know, I had like mint gum in my pocket at some point or something. And I guess it lived there a while, but she smelled like, like cigarettes and mint. That's the smell. And I smelled these gloves. I literally was like, oh, that was St. Bobby, So I'm just curious, like when we're talking about the fragrance of, right? And in this sense, they're talking about the fragrance of God, right? It's something that like you're able to kind of emit over the world. But I'm also curious about like what we are carrying through and carrying forward in that way and emitting around us as a result of like the people who have poured into us,
I love that, Natalie. I have not thought about how it's true that when I've been on a trip and I come home, the smell of being home brings about a feeling of I belong here. This is my place, and it's a way of telling me I'm in the right environment where things are settled. I've already established this is my home, and that's kind of another new way of finding myself at home with the fragrance of God. That's really lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Shirley, can I quote another truth passage that I think is becoming very, very famous? And this is on chapter 17. And tell me in the end, if you can, whether this is divine or human.
Okay.
Speak of the day from above, which has no night, and of perfect light that does not set. Say then from the heart that you are the perfect day, and within you dwells the light that never ends. Speak of the truth with those who seek it, and of knowledge with those who have sinned through transgression. Strengthen the feet of those who stumble, and stretch out hands to those who are weak. feed those who are hungry, and gives rest to the weary. Raise those who wish to be raised, and awaken those who sleep. For you are all understanding drawn forth. If strength does these things, strength becomes stronger. What I notice here is this is so, first of all, so full of wonder and power, but it never claims itself as just God or just human. But this is again yet another place where these early texts, both in the New Testament and beyond it, have to see divinity as multiply in humans and in divinity.
Very, very interesting. This seems to be a stretching night. You're pulling us in all kinds of directions. Very, very interesting. And I see we have some hands up now. Peggy.
Thank you. When I was looking at the citations that were chosen for today, I was kind of intrigued by the choice of the Gospel of Thomas, number 95, about if you have money, do not lend it at interest. Rather, lend it to someone who won't pay you back. And I think today that would be more a political thing than a religious thing. And I just would like to hear them talk about what they saw in that text, that they chose it for tonight.
Well, I should say before they answer that question that I'm the one who chose them, in the sense that I went through the book and found interesting passages myself. And I said, oh, we could talk about that, because they have a lot of passages. So I don't know if Hal and Natalie, you want to talk to that passage enough, but I will confess that I'm the one who selected that.
Okay.
I'd love to jump in there to again notice that what is going on there is a whole new way of seeing who's who and what life is called for. And so here we are so tied up in capitalism. In what is going on in our lives. But here, what the people of Israel claim, first of all, is that we can't sit on top of each other's wealth and proclaim it in any way. And then Jesus, as a Israel people, there also you have the very strong ability to have a basically someone who whose life on the edge of not having enough is exactly where one needs to see one's life and that other person's life. So staying together, that we're all claiming each other's wealth and poverty in the same kind of realities.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. And Helen, what do you think?
Hi. I had two comments. I love Natalie's thought about Mother Nature in support of Thecla. And I was thinking about the fact that one of the things that's really I enjoy about the Thecla story is that there are so many women, they're almost like a chorus, that they celebrate her, they applaud her, they are there to support her when she needs a place to stay. It just goes on, and it's a really strong theme in this story. And I thought that the Mother Nature theme of nature supporting it, well, nature is a feminine aspect. It's earthy, it's Mother Nature. And I'm wondering if that's sort of part of that same feminine support theme of being, but on a more cosmic scale, that sort of runs through that story. And I just love that, what you said about that. And then I have two very quick questions, and you don't have to answer me if you don't have time. Didn't John the Baptist baptize? And he was there from the very beginning. And then I wondered if Thunder Perfect Mind is Christian, because I can't find any evidence in the text, or whether it's some kind of ISIS ritual that they kind of adapted within the Christian community that happened to get into the Nag Hammadi find. So those are my stories. My questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of things to talk about. I'll just jump in with a little bit of that, Helen. Thank you. The only way that John the Baptist is John the Baptist is that the later Christians mistranslated it. In other words, that simply is that translation by Christians later had to be a bad translation because they needed to invent baptism. Is the main thing, and from my point of view, baptism in the current day is a lot less exciting and collective than the way it goes today. And what was the other thing, Helen?
About whether Thunder Perfect Mind is Christian, or whether it's some kind of ISIS incantation that they adopted for that community, and it ended up in the Nag Hammadi because of that.
Thank you. Easy thing to do. I and a number of colleagues across the country 2 years ago had a big book out that said there was no such thing as Christian for the first 2 centuries.
Part of the Jesus movement.
Yeah, well, that also you have to see that if that's the case, then Jesus also wasn't Christian.
Right, but but they started a movement of followers of this man, and a lot of the texts that are in the Nag Hammadi are part of that community in a Egyptian kind of cultural way. And I'm just wondering if Jesus, or the Jesus people, or whatever you want to call them, had anything to do with the actual composition of the Thunder Perfect Mind. I've read the book, by the way.
Thanks. No, because there was no such thing. But what I want to claim as a part of the larger Jesus stuff of that time is they claimed it. They claimed it because they knew that divinity was multiple. And they knew that they didn't have to cross themselves or something to make themselves into the real thing. In other words, the first 2 centuries are multiple in what kinds of people they are and what relationship do they have to divinities.
Okay. Thank you so much for those provocative questions, Helen, as usual. Very helpful. And Yvonne, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. It's not maybe a question, but just a comment about Thunder Perfect Mind. And I don't know if it would be something that would be considered a different take on it. I was thinking that Thunder Perfect Mind identifies herself as the one beaten, humiliated, and disgraced, just to offer a feeling of worthiness to those who are feeling and experiencing those atrocities themselves. Like in the Bible times and in our time, some might think that God is punishing one if they're suffering in these ways. But instead, Thunder's maybe saying, dear sufferer, you are still God's image and worthy of enlightenment, comfort, and peace in the midst of these things. And also like how Jesus showed the holes in his hands after the resurrection. And he was, to human sense, a sufferer, but he could go through it and out the other side. And Thunder's saying, you can too. You're still worthy of God's love as God's image, and even the childless, the whore, and the tax collector. So in the midst of atrocities, you can still feel my presence. You can still see me face to face, not humanly perfect, but divinely perfect, because perfect is no longer identified as without scars as it was in those days. Like you couldn't go into the temple if you're lame or blind or leprous. But those barriers are now deemed artificial, according to Thunder. And you will find me in the middle of pain and sorrow if you just look for me. Like Jesus found me so deeply that it resurrected him. And Stephen found me in persecution. And he, so much so that he could forgive his abusers and have the face of an angel during his demise. So it's just a question that may be a different way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Ellie put a note and a link. Wonderful book, Natalie and Hal. If you're interested in hearing more from Reverend Perkins, Natalie, check the podcast with her on Bible Search and Rescue. And the link is there in the chat for you to go directly to it. Toto's got a nice supportive thing about puppies for Natalie. Karen Hagan. Karen wrote, how about today we are each to baptize ourselves daily and with as many others in celebration of our newly made each day, of our being newly made each day. Like Thecla, we have that kind of power.
Well, okay, so while we're waiting for more hands to come up, I just wanted to ask Natalie, maybe you can talk to us about the phrase "in trembling boldness," which is the title of your book, and it comes from Thunder Perfect. Why did you find that phrase to be significant, and why did you pick that for the title of the book?
The entire phrase is, I am she who exists in all fears and in trembling boldness. I think there's a way in which we all have to show up to our lives, not knowing what's coming from moment to moment. That does indeed have to be bold. And sometimes, what is that quote? Someone on this will know who said it. Speak the truth, even if your voice shakes. This book that we wrote and the centering of marginalized stories that we did was super intentional, because those are the people whose voices never get heard. And these extracanonical texts are the ones who always get left out. So what happens when you put two left out things together, right? They're going to speak louder than they ever have before, even if their voices shake.
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Very, very poignant.
If I might just add that trembling is also a really important part of that phrase. And so for us to see trembling as a way of digging deeper into real life, trembling, boldness, both of those are really far apart and really can be lived together.
Wow. Go ahead. Someone's talking.
I just said, and often do live together.
Oh, yeah. So the other text that we have just not even touched on tonight, well, actually, the couple of them, we have the Odes of Solomon and the Thought of Norea. I'm just wondering the last couple of minutes here, if you might share with us, because we have talked about Norea a bit on this Bible and Beyond podcast discussions a bit, how Norea is such a short little text, and it kind of talks about her divinity and her humanity. Excuse me. I'm wondering again, I love hearing how you relate these. How does that relate to somebody of today who might be a marginalized person in some way with Norea?
Well, one of the things that I like best about getting comfortable with Norea is that it is, again, in this very similar way to what we've been talking about all evening long. Norea is not a big divinity. It's a medium-sized divinity. And the people of the 1st and 2nd century love her for it. It's so odd that when you get into the 4th and 5th centuries, more and more you see real Christianity coming, and they have to be all powerful. Mm-hmm. But Maria is just fine with being strong and beautiful and not always winning.
Okay, and yeah, because some days she doesn't get to go into the pleroma or the fullness.
Right.
But she has some helpers. So, okay, and do you have any last word maybe on the Odes of Solomon, or should we move on? Because I want to make sure that you've said what you want to summarize with. I'm curious about Odes of Solomon and how they relate to today, but I also wanted to give you a chance to maybe summarize your thoughts about this whole project.
I think that the Odes of Solomon, I love the role that music plays in the Odes of Solomon. It's a collection of early Christian worship material. And I think of it the same way that I think of like two churches existing next to each other, right? That just because they're next to each other doesn't mean that they necessarily are doing the same thing. And you can walk in and hear completely different genre of music depending on what kind of church it is. And I really love thinking about our ancient spiritual ancestors just like having all of these different things and different ideas and different understandings and also ways in which they say things floating around next to each other, trying to do this work of worship.
Natalie, I just hope everybody has a chance to hear your album on this. Tell us the name of your album.
The album is called, what is it called? Songs of Your Truth. And if you get the audible version of our book is coming out on November 7th, and some of the songs are in there.
Oh, wonderful.
They added the music in there. So you can get the album anywhere music is streamed or purchased, and the book as well. And yeah.
Oh, that's fun. Well, I want to make sure everybody has a chance to hear it. It's just remarkable. And you should realize that Natalie did the composing, right? You composed all those songs? Mm-hmm. Music for them. Yeah. So the words come from the Odes of Solomon, and Natalie created them in a whole bunch of different genres of music. So just breathtaking. Wonderful. Well, do either of you have any last sort of summarizing words you want to leave us with, or should we move on? Have you said your piece?
I would just want us all to see about the possibility of a book like this letting us claim a whole bunch of different kinds of spirits and a whole bunch of different kind of divinities for us, rather than just the very, for me, tired, always powerful.
All right. So I think, thank you. We have been given a lot to think about, as always. I'm just thrilled that both of you could come and join us tonight. Thank you so much, Hal and Natalie. And thank you, everybody else, too, for joining us and being here and participating with us. This was the October 2023 textual study on the Bible and Beyond discussions on finding wisdom for today from an extra-canonical smorgasbord with our guests, Dr. Hal Taussig and Natalie Renee Perkins. Once a month from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday nights, generally the 4th of the month, we provide a discussion of one or more of the early Christian texts. Some of our knowledgeable scholars lead these sessions, sharing a well-framed overview of these early Christian texts and allowing participants time to ask questions and share their insights. I think you know that we do rely on your donations. We're so grateful to those of you who have already pledged your support on Patreon or even PayPal or by check. One of the reasons I like the Patreon system is that it enables us to share our gratitude with specifics. Longtime supporters, I'm excited to share our new gifts with you, and grateful thanks go to everyone who's been supporting us in any way you can. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Just a word about what's coming up. We'll be beginning our new 2-month series on the Jewishness of Jesus. Gordon Reynal will start the series with a close look at Jesus and his Jewish mission. It's going to be another surprising and fascinating conversation.